Well, I was down here the other night and the camera ran out, but you didn't miss much. I ended up cleaning this part, prepping it for paint, and I'm covering this area here because this is the smooth surface that the grease must sit on, because that was like really polished. Definitely never had paint on it. I'm also got some tape in here, cover these surfaces, protect them from getting painted on. And made an interesting discovery, which was that on this unit right here, there were these little holes. There are these little holes right here that are cleaned out now, but they were completely blocked, and they are oil galleys. So when this is up underneath the table like that, they're at an angle so that oil dripped into them will run down and oil the bearing surfaces here for the handle shaft. So I cleaned those out really good, and I'm just gonna have to make a note to myself about the fact that they exist, because I could easily forget about them underneath there. But that's yet another thing that would be nice to do, oil that periodically to make that shaft turn a little easier. The other thing I did was I tried to remove this inner part from this outer part here, so that it'd be easier for me to clean the inner part, the threads on the inside, and B, easier for me to clean, prep, and paint this outer part. But unfortunately, it didn't work out. I actually threaded this shaft in from the other end so that I'd have something, so I have a rod to press on, and I put this in the press and tried pressing it, and I didn't put too much force on there because I was worried that if I'm completely wrong about this being a press fit, I was worried about damaging something. So I kind of had to give up on that, and what I ended up doing was I took it here in the parts cleaner and ran fluid down there while brushing as best as I could to hopefully clean out the inside threads there, and then I'll just tape off this part right here, which looks like it's not supposed to be painted, and prep and prime the rest of this. So now I'm going to turn my attention back to the gearbox assembly here. Alright, so I want to take this apart so I can clean this whole housing. There's the remnants of some very small amount of oil at the bottom there, but there's a lot of sludge and debris and stuff down the bottom there. And there's a whole yoke assembly in here that holds the bearing carriers for this shaft and this shaft. And I think there's a way to actually remove that from this housing, but I gotta get these shafts out first. For starters, I'm going to take this pulley off. This pulley is just the completely wrong size pulley for this, and actually I'm going to cover all that when everything else is done and I get to the point where I'm talking about how I'm going to power this thing. I'll talk about the proper RPMs that we should be getting at the spindle for those bigger drill bits, and how the way this is set up right now, the way this guy had this running, it was running way too fast. This originally was supposed to be run from an overhead line shaft with a big flat belt that came down, and there was actually a pretty elaborate mechanism. Well, not really elaborate, but there were other parts here that are missing. This shaft has got two steps to it. It's threaded here on the end. There was actually supposed to be a pulley, and then sort of like a smaller diameter pulley where you actually had a belt shipper, they called it, which was a device that would kick the belt over to the smaller pulley, thereby stopping the drive and essentially kind of like putting the unit in neutral, and then you would flip the lever back and it would go back onto the larger pulley, and then it would start moving. Those pulleys probably weren't that much bigger in diameter than the one that's on here now, but the overhead line shaft was probably running at around 250 RPM. The motor that was on this, even though it was a smaller pulley going up to a larger pulley, you did have some reduction there, but the motor was probably a 1750 RPM. So you can imagine that this thing was probably running at a minimum 4 times faster than it should have. So for starters, I'm going to take this pulley off. Alright, so when I was trying to take this apart outside, because I wanted to get this big shaft off of here, I had unscrewed this top piece right here, and I'll take that off now, only to discover that all this does, this actually retains the bearing in the yoke here. So now, with this off, I was able to pull up on this and see the bearing starts to come out, but the problem is the bevel gear underneath there is still attached, and this shaft doesn't appear to pull out. But I now see what sure looks like another one of these tapered pin deals, kind of like what I saw when I was taking apart the Hendy. So I learned a little bit from the Hendy experience to tell me that I should be able to knock that pin out, and that might be what will take this shaft. I'm almost positive that's going to allow me to pull this shaft up and off out of the way. So let me go get a drift for that and throw this in the parts washer while I'm at it. Oh, the pin just went flying and fell into the black swamp where the creature of the Black Lagoon resides. I can still see clearly through the hole, indicating that the shaft is not moving at all. Now, wouldn't that be a hoot if that's threaded on there? Well, just found out that collar does turn, so let's see if it actually unscrews from that. It does look like it's going up. I think I got the right idea, I just got the wrong tools to do it. This pipe wrench is too big, I need the next size pipe wrench down. Well, I got a better size pipe wrench for holding on to that, and I'm able to grip this with channel locks. And it's turning. And so far, I do think it is actually unscrewing, as opposed to just turning and turning and turning on the shaft. So it appears like maybe this collar is threaded on and then a pin goes through it, which kind of seems odd to me. But this is definitely coming out further now than it was. Bearing back down. Kind of see under them. I still can't see any threads. I've got to get a light to shine in there. Yep, it's threaded. You can see the threads. Of course, the irony of all this is that if I unscrew this collar, it's going to do nothing for me to get this. It's going to do nothing as far as helping me get this shaft off. All it's going to prove to me is that the intention was for this shaft to go out in that direction, which means this yoke assembly has to come out of there before that can happen. The yoke assembly, I think, is held in by a couple of bolts up through the bottom, and that's not going to come out until this shaft is removed. So I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing here and go ahead and remove. There are 3 screws on the side here that look like they have to do with holding on this access plate. And I can see inside here there's another 3 screws with a bearing cap or retainer. But maybe, unlike this one, maybe if I unscrew that I can get this out. I hope. Ha! So this shaft is actually supported out here by a bearing, and then it's supported by another bearing where it goes into the bevel gear. So that makes sense. It's supported on both ends. Well, that's disheartening. That did nothing. Alright, so let me show you what I got for a problem here. Alright, this whole unit that holds the bearings and the gear assembly in that box, I can see screw heads down in the bottom there. So the base of this is screwed down to the base of this this case. Now there's no openings or ports in the bottom of this case. So that whole assembly is going to come out through the top. When you unscrew those screws way down in there, this whole assembly will come out through the top, except there's the shaft here coming out on the left hand side that goes through the side. And because of the length of the shaft, there's no room to move this over and get that out. So there's no way that's coming out unless I get this shaft out. Now, took the cap off here, all that does is expose this outer bearing. That does nothing for me. I see 3 screws in there, but those are just for an identical cap like the one on top here that holds this bearing in, and I already learned from this one that all that's going to let me do is take the bearing off. And I can't even do that with this collar on. So if I remove this threaded collar, I can remove the bearing. That's not going to do much for me, because the problem is the shaft is still attached to the bevel gear. Now it looks like I can just see, if I hold this just right, looks like I can see a pin. Hold on, let me rotate this around. Alright. So if I can get the camera in there with the light at the same time. It's kind of tight. Damn it. There we go. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a pin there. There's a pin on the part of the bevel gear there. And then there's, of course, it looks like another pin on this collar on the outbound side, but I'm worried that that is another one of these screw-on collars. But I'm going to see if I can knock those pins out and see if any of those allow that shaft to slide out.